thy neighbor. Greetings, family, and thank you for joining me on this journey to Long Island as we meet a dynamic mother and daughter cancer surviving team. Let's listen, learn, and get some inspiration.
Hi, my name is Susan. I come from a family of 4 children. I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. I grew up in Elmont, and I have very fond memories of being next to my father doing everything, whether he was under the car or up on the roof. I was always there as his helper.
My name is Jennifer, and I do have a brother. Some of the things that we did together would be just working in the yard, cleaning up, or working in the garden. Firewood would be delivered, and we'd all have to haul it into the backyard. Just being together.
When I was a child growing up, my father delivered Coca-Cola when Coca-Cola was still in glass bottles. And when I became a young adult, he then worked for New York City Department of Traffic as a maintenance man. But my father was very handy. The way we grew up, nobody could afford to call a plumber if something was leaking or fix something if whatever was broken. My father, even though he was uneducated formally, he could fix anything.
My family relationship is very important. We've always stuck together. There's been some rough times that we've been all through. They're very supportive.
We have been through, as a family, many rough times. Before my children were born, I had what was considered a quickie wedding because my husband was on his way to Vietnam. We didn't have a choice. That's the way it was back then. And then we went through some rough times as, you know, just struggling to make ends meet. It was very difficult. And you always had to be creative. How can you stretch a dollar a little further? How can you keep that car running so you didn't have to replace it? How are you going to send your kids to college and pay for it? It was always a struggle financially. My husband and I started dating at age 16, so today that's considered rather young. We got engaged after graduating high school, and then he got his draft notice. He did a delay of going into the Marine Corps. And I saw him graduate boot camp down in Paris Island. And then he went on to Camp Lejeune, came home, told me to make wedding plans. So we had a very fast, throw-together wedding. And 2 weeks later, after the wedding, he was on his way to Vietnam. He was 19. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
He was 19 and on his way to a war. It was extremely difficult. I'm sorry. An event that changed my life drastically was in May of '91. I was a student at SUNY Old Westbury because I wanted to be able to be a little more financially independent. And I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It came as a complete shock because I always had in my head people with cancer were sick, and I wasn't sick. I went through 3 rounds of chemo, then they did the surgery, and I continued with 9 more months of chemo. It was a rough year of having chemotherapy and a few other small surgeries after the big one. And then I also had 2 teenagers at home. And it was a very difficult time for everyone in the family. Chemotherapy was extremely debilitating. I considered a younger woman at the time. I was early 40s, very active, and I was able to do absolutely nothing. I couldn't make a sandwich for my kids. I couldn't vacuum, which I love to do. There was nothing I could do. What I did is pray a lot. And the thing I prayed for was that whatever time I had left to live, that I would live a normal life. And what I consider normal is vacuuming and washing windows and doing laundry and playing in the kitchen and cooking for the family and shopping. So it changed a lot of things in my perspective of life and how precious and how uncertain. I remember going through a support group, which I think was very helpful at the time. And I went out to lunch with one of the girls that was in the support group, and I'll never forget, we sat at the restaurant in Franklin Square, it happened to be, and she starts crying and she says to me, who of us in the group, there was 6 of us maybe, is gonna die first? And I said to her, look around this whole restaurant. All these people are gonna die, and nobody knows when. So you have a choice, as I have a choice. Do you wanna sit here and just sit and wait to die? Or do you choose, and choice is so important, do you choose to say, I'm gonna cram as much into this day as I can? And that's what I do.
When my mother was diagnosed, I was a senior in high school. I don't remember exactly everything, but I do remember that feeling of having to be there for everything with her. I remember I was driving, and I would drive up to the hospital, sometimes twice a day when she had the surgery. I remember my brother not getting involved. Looking back now, it was probably because he couldn't deal with it, because everybody deals with things differently. I just remember that uncertainty and, what's gonna happen next. And watching my mother lay in bed after chemo treatments and being so sick. When I was diagnosed, it was actually, I believe, 20 years.
Yeah,
20 years
same week.
to the same week in May. And it was almost like I knew. I knew the diagnosis was coming. I found the lump myself. I went to the doctor. I did everything that they told me to do. And it was over a course of a weekend. And I remember my doctor calling me and telling me that it was cancer. I was at work. I immediately left work. I remember coming home crying. My mother was there, and my ex-husband, my husband at the time, was there as well. And I remember telling them both at the same time. I gave myself one day to feel sorry for myself. And after that, it was game on. I took the diagnosis as a job that I had to conquer and that I had to take care of. I also had a very young child at home too, who was graduating nursery school. So it was very difficult trying to put on a brave face for her and making it okay for her to see me be upset and still be able to get through it.
When Jennifer was diagnosed, it was a shock. I didn't get angry, but she had gone through a very difficult pregnancy. And during her difficult pregnancy, she would not always get a good report from her doctor visits. So I would bring her home and she'd be very upset. And I would say to her, all right, I'll give you 10 minutes. You can cry, scream, carry on 10 minutes, and then you're going to pull yourself together because you have a baby that's dependent on you. An innocent child that can't do anything but wait to be born. So you're going to do your part. So get it out and then pull it together. And she did. So basically, when she was diagnosed, when Anissa was so young, I viewed it the same way. Get it out, whatever you gotta do, scream, cry, carry on, and then pull yourself together and remain calm. Because when you remain calm, it's very powerful. You can think. When you think, then you can say, well, what are my options? What should I do? Should I go for this type of surgery, that kind of surgery? What should I do? What are the questions to ask the doctor next time I go? Because if you stay in that upsetting, crying, screaming, just keep on rolling with it, you can't think. And you can't be productive. You can't take the driver's seat and make certain decisions you have to make, because once you make certain decisions about your treatment, and if it doesn't work and it stinks or whatever happens, 6 months from now, you can't roll back and rewind life and say, oh, gee, let me do the other way. It doesn't work like that in life. So always make sure that you're making the best decision you can, given the facts that you have at the time.
So my experience with chemotherapy, I'll never forget. It was psychologically very difficult because you feel okay. And this was after I had the surgery, and I had a double mastectomy and reconstruction. And when I did start the chemo, I walked into the room, and you're in there with a slew of other people. And I remember sitting there, my cousin actually took me, and you give up your arm and you allow them to put poison in you. And you just sit there. And that was probably the biggest hurdle for me to begin that, is that I am intentionally allowing this nurse, who is very nice, to put this poison in my body, and I'm gonna sit here for the next 3 hours and allow her to put this strip in. And I kept waiting for the boom, like something to happen while I was sitting there during the treatment. My mom never came into the treatment room with me. I guess it was too difficult for her to witness.
No, the smell. There's a certain smell. You never forget.
No. But I do remember sitting there and just waiting as this poison is being dripped into me. And it's different colors, and it's just a very surreal, weird, and then the nurse comes back and she's like, okay, you're all done. And you walk out of there and you wait to feel different or wait for something, and it doesn't happen right away. It comes like maybe a week later, and they prep you. They say your hair's gonna fall out, you're gonna be dry mouth, you're gonna have all these, your eyes are gonna be dry, or you're not gonna be hungry, or you may be sick but you may not. And you're waiting for that boom to hit, and then all of a sudden you're taking a shower and a clump of hair falls out. And all that time, for those 2 weeks, you're sitting there going, maybe it's not gonna be me. And I'll never forget when my hair started falling out, and it was very difficult for me. That was probably the most difficult thing. I came to terms with it. I went to my hairdresser, and she cut my hair real short, which probably wasn't a good idea because it actually hurt when it was falling out. But the biggest boom for me was when my eyelashes and my eyebrows fell out, because I felt like I still had it together. And I did it. Once that happened, I didn't have it together. And wigs, I bought a wig, never wore it. I would just put on like wraps on my head because your head is cold. You don't realize all these things. And I've always had a lot of hair, but that was very difficult.
When I had the chemo, I had it for a year, and I would tell my oncologist, was very vocal, always have been, and I said to him, he was a very kind and gentle man, which is something I needed during this chaos. And I said to him, you play with my head psychologically. I said, because you go to the doctor when you're feeling sick, and he'll give you a prescription or whatever, and you'll feel better. I says, I feel better, and I come to you, and you make me sick. When I was diagnosed, I didn't have very good anti-nausea drugs. I would get the treatment on a Friday, like at 1 o'clock. My sister would drive me home. I don't know how she got me from the driveway into bed. And I would start vomiting every 20 minutes until Sunday night at supper time. I'm a little heavier than I was then, and it does a number on your body, because if you're vomiting from Friday to Sunday nonstop every 20 minutes and you're not eating because you can't keep anything down, and then you start to feel better and you go back for more. Yeah. So I said to him, it's a mind game, and you know, I did this for first 6 months with the heavy chemo, and then the second 6 months wasn't as bad, but it's still, you don't have an appetite, you know damn well you don't look good. And of course, every time you go to the doctor's office, oh, how are you doing today? You're looking good. And you know, they're lying to you. It's a very difficult time. I remember being at an engagement party, and I didn't want to be in any pictures because I had to wear a wig. And it was my mother with her camera, and she just didn't get the message because she had to be told over and over again. It's just a very uncomfortable feeling to have somebody want to take a picture so that they have this forever to look at, you at your worst. I did go to a high school reunion with my husband, and there were a lot of us at this reunion that were in the same 6th grade class. So we went out in the hallway, and this was in the month of July. I finished my year of chemo in May. So this is 2 months after finishing a year of chemo. And somebody sent me a copy of the picture, which was very nice of them. But in that picture, I look like death warmed over. Chemotherapy is rough stuff. And you hope it works, because there's no guarantee.
Right.
During this time of going through all of this chemo and whatnot, surgery, I had no place to hide. The house that I live in is very small. So if I would be in the shower and start crying, Jennifer would run out and tell her father, Mommy's in the shower crying. There was no place to hide and get lost. What I've always felt a sense of peace and serenity and calmness in church. And I've always been active in my church. So that gave me a lot of support and helped me through this difficult time. And I pray a lot. I pray sometimes over and over again. Even my grandchildren know in the car, when we first get in the car, don't talk, Grandma's got to pray. And then I have one grandchild that will ask me, Grandma, what do you pray for? So I've had some very interesting conversations with them over the years. But I joined a support group at the Adelphi Breast Cancer and Support Program. So going to a support group with women who had been recently diagnosed, and that's how they did it at that time. So if you were recently diagnosed, you were in a group together, and it met with a social worker or a social worker intern. And you went for like 8 weeks. And if you continued into another support group, you could do that. The group that I was in, we continued to see each other because we liked to go out for dinner. So it was a good excuse to get together. And we would talk about things about our treatments and what we were going through. Hair was an issue for me. And of course, not having hair for a year, when it started growing in, then what do? Because hair doesn't grow evenly, so there were some that were an inch and some was like peach fuzz. And I'll never forget not wanting to go to a hairdresser and feeling like everybody's looking at me. And one of the women in the support group offered to take me, which I thought, wow. She wanted to take me like I was a child to go get my hair done. And what did I do? I did something that to me sounds crazy today. I went to a mall that's not near my house because the department store was offering, if you spend $30 on makeup, you can get a makeover and your hair styled. So I drove 15 minutes away from my house where nobody would know me because I didn't want to sit on a chair in the middle of a department store for somebody to do makeup and hair on me. I mean, it sounds ridiculous today, but I was dead serious about it. I didn't want anybody to see me in that position.
As far as support for me, I chose not to join any groups. I had my cousin, who's a nurse, was there with me. I had my mom, of course. I didn't get much support, let's just say, from my ex-husband at all. But I tried to maintain everything's going to be okay because, again, I had a very small child at home. So when I did go for my treatments, I did speak with a social worker a couple of times. But as far as reaching out to others in groups like that, I chose not to go that route. I have spoken to a couple of women who have been diagnosed after I was and explained my experiences to them and gave my 2 cents. But as far as for myself, I chose not to do that. All my motivation for this came from my daughter. When I was diagnosed initially, I did go for the BRCA testing. It's a genetic testing panel that they do to you to see if you're carrying the gene of the mutation. I'm not carrying it. But my concern was that my mother was a breast cancer survivor. Here I am 20 years later with the same diagnosis. And here I have a child who is 5 years old. And, what about her? And my brother has 2 daughters. And what about them? And so I chose to have the testing done. And I'm not carrying the gene, but that was a big deal for me to have that test done to see if I was a carrier. I guess the biggest change in my lifestyle since being diagnosed with cancer, it made me take a really good look at my life and what I was doing with it. I was in an unhappy marriage. It definitely opened my eyes to that. And I made changes to my life. I ended up getting divorced. And although that was very rough as well, I was also a cancer survivor. So really, what else could happen at that point? But it was difficult, and I'm happy to say that I made that change, and I am in a way better place right now for it.
I think to look at how anything has changed your life, I'm a believer that things happen for a reason, and we don't always know what that reason is. And it comes back to choice again. So when something happens as serious as a life-threatening illness, it makes you look at things and say, what am I going to do? It's easy to sit here and say, poor me, poor me. It's much more difficult to say, what am I going to do next? At the time I was diagnosed, I was working on my bachelor degree, and I needed 4 more classes to graduate. I am a rather stubborn person. After the year of chemo, I kept signing up for the classes, but I physically couldn't do it. So I would have to withdraw. So then the next semester I would sign up again. I still couldn't do it. I would have to withdraw. I did go back and I finished up, and the day of graduation, I felt like I was the only person on the face of the earth that ever accomplished getting that piece of paper. It changes who you are, and it makes you much more aware of things happen to everybody. The thing is, the only thing you can control is how you're going to deal with it. And I believe in going forward and not looking backward and saying, poor me, and look what happened to me. No, what did I do with my life? I accomplished getting a college degree. I accomplished having a very successful, rewarding career. I accomplished the fact that I put my 2 children through college and saw them both flourish in their careers. I got to be blessed with grandchildren, which is the cherry on top of the whole cake. And that I believe in being active. The cancer didn't change that for me. I've always been active. I always believed in eating right and no fast foods and no fried foods and whatnot. I always try to stay and do what's best for my body. Before cancer, after cancer, that hasn't changed who I am. But I'm a strong believer in positive thinking and praying a lot.
So I'll never forget the time that I was in with my surgeon, and this was way after chemo and, towards the end of my treatment follow-up visit. And she said to me, they were offering another drug to me that I could take, but they weren't telling me I had to take it. And I remember it was like I was coming up on that final witching hour where I had to make the decision on whether I was going to take this drug, because it was I believe it was like a couple of years I had to take this drug. And I asked her opinion because I valued what she had to say. And she said to me, point blank, you were diagnosed with cancer. We told you to have a lumpectomy. You decided to have a double mastectomy. We told you had to take chemo. You took the chemo. We told you had to take the Herceptin. You took the Herceptin, which was another drug after. She goes, we're not telling you you have to take this drug. We're telling you you can if you want. She goes, if it was up to me, I would say you did everything that you were supposed to do. Now it's your job to just go live. And I've always taken that to heart. I don't remember a lot that happened during that time in my life. I still have trouble remembering a lot of things now, and I think it's because of the chemo. I'm conscious of it, but it does take me some time to like replay a lot of things in my mind, because it doesn't come naturally to me, or it doesn't come quickly. But I do remember her saying it's time to just go live.
I felt very strongly after I did the support group at Adelphi Breast Cancer and Hotline and Support Program. After doing that, I decided to become a Hotline volunteer. The hotline works out of the basement in the School of Social Work at Adelphi University in Garden City. And because there's social worker interns working in the program, they facilitate a training program for all hotline volunteers. And at any given time, there would be about 100 volunteers. And it's a very, some people are joining, some people are leaving for a lot of different reasons. I was a hotline volunteer for about 18 years. And what that entailed me to do, I did some outreach work that I would go wherever they were invited to go to health fairs or whatever, give out information, answer questions. But I also covered what was called a time slot. And I covered from Monday mornings from 9 a.m. to 11, and I would take calls. And you never know what you're going to get when somebody calls a hotline. And a lot of times it was people with just general questions, or I would get sometimes men would say, they would be very upset and they would say, my wife is diagnosed, she's got to talk to us. Well, I says, that's all well and good. We have support groups for the men in our lives. We have support groups for the younger women, for metastasized breast cancer. There's numerous support groups. And I said, if your wife wants to call, I can talk to her, which a lot of times you have family members that want to help, but they don't know how to help. And I did that for, like I say, a number of years. And I also was one of the volunteers that was asked to go to Washington to advocate for breast cancer research and whatnot. And that was the National Breast Cancer Coalition Conference. And I went to that for about 15 years. And every year you would go, and they were very, very good about teaching. We'd have plenary sessions, and they would teach us how to go and meet with our elected officials, both the House of Representatives and our senators. And we would know they prepared us very well. We would know the bill that we were there to speak about, and to try to get them to vote for, pushing certain things. One of the things that the first trip I went down there, I remember, and keep in mind this is years ago, that we had mammography vans going around. And that was all well and good, that women can go get a mammography. One of the bills that we were fighting for when we were down in Washington, the day that we would lobby, was that we would tell the elected officials, we're all very happy that we have these mammography vans going throughout the country, that women could be tested, but there was nothing to cover them if there was a problem. And that was one of the bills we did on lobby day to ask for. It was a very empowering thing for me to do, because I had a daughter, and someday I would have granddaughters. And I felt very strongly that I had to go to Washington every year and go meet with elected officials to ask them to fund more things or get money from the Department of Defense, which never made sense to any of us. That's where a lot of the money, the research money came from, was through the Department of Defense, and you had to, go to your elected officials and ask for it. So it was a very empowering thing to do, and I was very glad to do it. There's one thing that stands out to me, and people would ask me, knowing that I was an Adelphi Breast Cancer Hotline volunteer, and then I would speak to people on the phone. And sometimes they would be asking for, well, where can I get a mammography for free? People don't have insurance. Where can I go for a wig? And we had paper, it was in paper, and we had loose leaf binders back then. We would have information that I could look it up for somebody. And if I didn't have the answer right away, I would say, or if they asked me, what does radiation feel like? Well, I never had radiation, but how about, is it okay with you if I have another volunteer who's had radiation call you? And nobody ever said no. So it was a lot of referrals doing it that way. Excuse me. The most common question I ever got, and this may surprise you, I don't know, people would ask me after talking to them a while, they would say to me, did you have breast cancer? And I would say to them, yes. The next question would always be, when? I said, I was diagnosed in May of 1991. And every time, and this question was asked me, I can't even tell you how many, so numerous times, every time there would be a silence on the other end because they were either counting their fingers or figuring out. But it wasn't polite to say what they were thinking, and what they were probably thinking is, oh my God, and she's still alive. I would say to people also, I said, listen, if we're in the supermarket and over the loudspeaker they say, everybody who's been diagnosed with cancer, can you come to the front, raise your hand? I said, you'd be shocked. You'll fall over to see how many people are still living after a cancer diagnosis. Because when you're the one that's first diagnosed, you don't realize everybody else and know everybody else. I said, I don't wear a sign on my head who I am or what's happened to me. But I think it's very empowering for people to realize they're not alone. And you could either call a hotline and talk to a stranger, because that you can say anything you want. And people would say, can I ask you this? Or you can ask me anything you want. If I don't feel comfortable answering it, I'll tell you. But people would ask, you'd be shocked at some of the things that people would ask you. What does a reconstructed breast feel like? I would answer them the best I could.
I would like to tell my neighbors there should be a little bit more common sense in this world.
How about acceptance?
Acceptance, common sense.
Let's coexist.
Yes. And you never know what somebody is dealing with behind closed doors. And I think that's very important for people to realize.
There's too much negativity. There's too much judgment. There's too much everybody being in everybody's business. I think we have to learn how to coexist, respect everyone. That doesn't mean you have to change what your values are, but respect everybody else's values. We're all on this earth for a limited amount of time. And gee, if tomorrow happens to be your day that it's all over, what a damn shame if you haven't used it. You know, I believe that God gives you life. That's your gift. He gave you life. Your gift back is what you do with that life.
Leva a noise,